Okay, there we go. So, hi everyone, I'm Kyle Peterson. I am SharePoint consultant, just doing my own thing for the last 4 years. Certified master, been doing this for a long time, since SharePoint 2003. So I've been playing in this space for a long time. My background is custom app dev, so I do a lot of custom app dev along the way. I like that kind of side of things. I like the customization side of things and what we kind of extending what we can do out of the box. My company is PDX Portals, and basically I kind of provide support for IT organizations. So while I can come in and do big projects, my best role is basically helping companies coming in once a week, once a month, answering the hard questions, helping them make sure they're on the right path and making the right decisions on things, doing demos for them, showing them new capabilities they might not know about, and basically just kind of expanding them so I can make your team a lot better by just coming in doing kind of a part-time consulting kind of thing. And it works really well. I've got a handful of clients in the Portland area I've been doing this with for several years now, and it's a really great model where they have a technical resource that they can go to when they have the hard questions and not spend 6 hours Googling things and finding out a really bad answer. So we're going to talk about the starter kit, and the big thing about this thing for me is that customization is back in Office 365. We went through a lull for a long time when SharePoint 2013 came out. We really got a mixed message out of Microsoft about what branding, what customization was supposed to be. You know, for a while we had the sandbox solutions, and then that kind of died off. And then we had add-ins, and that had a lot of issues with stuff. Client-side code's really good, but don't put client-side code up in the cloud. They basically went back and forth on a lot of this stuff, and we really didn't have a really clear message on how we should do customizations. And as a result, I told a lot of my customers, don't do branding. Don't do customizations in Office 365. We don't have a really good path for this stuff to support this stuff, unless you've got a really strong dev community. But now with the path forward, we basically have the SharePoint framework. And the SharePoint framework gives us a lot of really good solid components. It's architected into the modern interface, so we're part of the page lifecycle now. We're not just doing an iframe locked into a page. We're actually part of the page rendering cycle. So we can participate in that whole entire page, and we know that our web parts or extensions are going to be part of the page and not just kind of a bolt-on for stuff. We currently, in SharePoint framework, we have the web parts part now. We've got headers and footers through extensions, so we can actually inject things in the headers and footers. We can do custom commands, column formatting, and web part connections where web parts can talk to each other is in preview right now. And that should be coming out later on this year sometime. So we've got a lot of the same building blocks that we had back of the old SharePoint on-prem days. So this really gives us a good, solid, fundamental thing of what we can actually start building solutions with. And that's really what Patterns and Practices is all about. PMP is a group within Microsoft that started this, basically saying, we want to start sharing with the community all the best practices that about SharePoint customization and development. And so they've built a repository of libraries, sample code, documentation, tons of stuff out there on how we can actually build SharePoint applications. So there's a lot of community support. Basically it's a team that's developed within Microsoft. Vesta runs it from the Microsoft side. They have a lot of community support. There's monthly calls on 3 different special interest groups. Like I said, I'll show you a link in a second on where you can go for more information. But it's a really cool organization. So if you want information about development and developing SharePoint framework stuff, definitely you want to look into the PMP stuff. What the PMP team did, this is actually their slide. By the way, these slides, I'll post a link up in Meetup on how you can find these slides when we get done. You can see there's a ton of resources in here. They have YouTube videos. They have, like I said, monthly community calls where they talk about what's new. There is Twitter handles. There's just so much stuff that comes out of this stuff. But what they did recently was came out with this starter kit. And the starter kit is, in itself, just really a demonstration of here's what you can do with the SharePoint framework. We have all these building blocks. We have web parts. We have these headers and footers. Let's put them together and show what an intranet might look like if you start actually using all these things together. So really what I want to kind of show you guys today is like what that starter kit looks like. And there's some really interesting things in the starter kit that's actually usable today. There's some web parts in there we'll look at in a second. But it's all about how can we use these capabilities in the SharePoint framework to develop and make our intranets better. So let's take a look at it real quick, and we'll dive into it a little deeper. So this is what a provisioned starter kit looks like. It's basically, not what, this resolution's kind of funky here. But there's a combination of out-of-the-box web parts. Like on the left-hand side there, we have our, come back. We have our hero web part. Come here. And then on the right-hand side, there is a new custom web part, which is called Tiles, which just kind of gives us a different way of doing navigation. This is really back to old promoted links, but this is all in the modern interface. And then we have some out-of-the-box things for company news. You notice there's a weather and a stock ticker. And then there's some new types of images we can use. These are called banners. And then there's some clock real-time web parts as well. So we have some things in there. We'll go into more detailed stuff, but that's kind of at a quick high level on stuff. There's a couple other things noticing. One is we have a footer at the bottom. So this is a common footer that's going to follow us across all the pages. And then this also creates, as part of a hub site, so we get some of the hub site navigation stuff as well. And there's some other goodies hidden in there as we'll talk about as well. So the starter kit itself is a little bit of a challenge to install. This is not something that a normal admin can just pick up off the shelf and drop on your site real very easily. It has a couple things it requires. First off, it requires targeted release for your tenant. And the reason is some web parts on that. Let me show you real quick. There's a personal page. Okay, I take my life in my hands every time I demo this, because this thing does not work reliably. Come on, baby, do it. What this does, these have web parts that are basically, yeah, it's not going to work. These web parts go out and query using the Microsoft Graph APIs and query, bring back your tasks, your events, your calendars, entries, your sites you follow, a lot of different stuff. And it's a little bit flaky. That stuff's in preview right now, and that's the reason why we have to be in targeted release. So let me go back and get back to the home page on this. Once it starts failing, it fails classically. So we have to be on targeted release. We assume that basically, in order to do the deployment of the starter kit, it needs to have the full SPFX toolchain, which is like Gulp, Node, Webpack. There's basically a whole installation process for that. I'm not going to cover that today. At some point, I guess we haven't had a development session on SharePoint Framework recently. We should do one of those. But it's like there's a whole toolchain that goes with that. The most important thing is the PnP shell extension. The PnP PowerShell extension is basically a bunch of extensions for PowerShell that add some really cool capabilities to PowerShell. And you have to be basically on the current release. And that version number is actually wrong. It's 2.28.1807. There is a version 3.0.1808 that has issues right now. And so I don't recommend going to it. I just updated my laptop 2 days ago to get ready for the demo. And everything broke horribly. And we finally traced it down to there's some bad code in that version of it. So there's a newer update out there, which I haven't tried it yet. There is another path here, though. So if you don't want to actually go all this route, there is a simplified installation where basically we just deploy the web parts on a site. And we have to run a little bit of PowerShell also to actually provision a couple things. But we can actually do that without being on target release. And basically what we'll do is we'll customize the solution and pull out all those web parts we don't need. And I'll show you an example. We'll talk about how you do it yourself if you're a developer. If not, I'll also give you a link. There's a guy out there that actually has done this and posted this out in GitHub. That you can actually download their package that has just those web parts that are safe to put on a production tenant. But you still have to run a little bit of PowerShell provisioning to get some of the things required, some of those things for the use. So let's go talk about the installation process. I'm going to kick off an installation.
Kyle, can I ask a quick question on this? So
Sure.
Would it be best then to just use a test tenant to do the full installation and then just pull over pieces you need to production? Is that possible?
You can't do that because it still requires installation of the web parts essentially. So when you're deploying SharePoint Framework stuff, it's a app package, SPPKG. And that has to be installed into your app catalog correctly. So it's really, you can't copy that very easily from one tenant to the next. You kind of need to do that installation. Okay. So this is a PowerShell script. I'll include this as well. This is basically just kind of a mix match of stuff. So one of the things is if you ever want to find out what version of the PowerShell commandlets you're running, you run this command. I've actually got two versions side by side. So I've got that 228.1807. That's actually a good, nice, safe version of this. If you want to install PowerShell on these modules, you basically would run this command, install module, and it uses -force if you want to make sure you force an upgrade for an existing version. So that will actually install those PnP PowerShell commandlets that you need. And I'm going to kick off this installation. I'm just going to highlight some lines here and get started. We're just going to run these little short ones. And we'll talk about what this thing is doing under the covers. So my success ratio on this thing is not super high. I think I've got it working now. But all my problems that I've had in the past when this thing has not worked have been due to the PowerShell version not being correct. Once I get that worked out, everything seems to work fine. So it's actually basically signing in, and now it's basically running through some provisioning stuff. This normally takes about 10 to 15 minutes, so I'm just going to let this thing run in the background, and we'll come back and look at it later on. But we're going to talk about kind of what's going on behind the scenes here. So the deployment process of this thing is it's running this one script, deploy.ps1, which then invokes a bunch of other things. This thing is based off of a capability that PnP came up with, which is the provisioning framework. And the provisioning framework is a way for us to, how do we inject assets into SharePoint safely? In the past, on-prem, we had web templates and a way of actually templatizing a site. Basically, we created this big, massive XML file that described all the site and all kind of everything was in it. And Microsoft actually used this under the covers. When you do the save site as template, that's actually what it's creating these templates. The problem was that really wreaked havoc in Office 365 for doing upgrades, because now you had this static snapshot of a site that had content types, lists, and everything. And then when you built a new site and they've changed the content types, they've changed the layouts, these templates weren't upgradable at all. And so that created lots of problems. So the patterns and practice team came back and said, okay, the right approach to this is not saving things as a snapshot, but saving things as a list of here's the things we want to do to a site. We want to create a content type that's going to have these site columns. We want to add this to navigation. We want to do all these, inject all these changes into a site. And so the provisioning process basically captures all that as a series of steps in an XML file of all the things you want to do. I've done sessions on the provisioning framework before. I'll do more later on someday in the future. It's really cool. But basically what this thing is doing is using that provisioning framework to do a lot of this stuff. So we're going to go through and we're going to, it's going to create 3 sites based on the file that's called hierarchy.json, which is basically a list of the sites. It's going to create those sites for us. It's going to then build and deploy that solution package. So this is where it needs that tool chain to do that stuff. And we can kind of get around that if we need to. There's a flag that says don't build it. It's going to set the default theme to being orange. That was Vesta's favorite color, so he made it orange. It's going to register the hub site. One of those sites is going to be the hub site, and it's going to create the hub site association for us automatically. It's going to put a key in their tenant properties. And I don't know if people know about tenant properties. This is a storage area that you can kind of access by PowerShell where you can put connection strings, API keys, things like that in a secure location for your tenant-wide so that all of your applications can access that stuff. It's a really good, secure way of kind of locking that stuff away that only administrators can actually access. And you can only access it through PowerShell or through code. After that, it's going to build a term store. And I've highlighted here that like term.xml file. That's the provisioning file that is basically going to execute to build that term store. We'll look at that in a second. Then it's going to do more provisioning stuff. It's going to provision the hub site XML. So it's created the hub site kind of in the first step, but this basically then throws all of the stuff it needs to on that hub site. It's going to create content types. It's going to create entries in lists. It's going to create pages for us. It handles all that stuff automatically. It's going to then also apply the provisioning template for the portal footer. So it basically puts that footer configuration in for us. We'll talk more about that one too. It's going to do the collab XMLs on the team sites. It basically does some provisioning on the team sites. It creates a site design, essentially site script and site design for team and communication sites, and then it updates the navigation. So that basically that script running in the background is doing all this stuff for us. The idea behind this is a couple things. One is provisioning framework can do a lot of cool things, and 2 is we have a repeatable process. This is a pretty grand scale of all stuff, creating multiple sites, tying them all together. Not really applicable for every organization. But the building blocks, the things it's demonstrating are really key here. The fact that we can change navigation, we can do associations with hub sites, we can inject content, we can inject look and feel, we can install applications. All this stuff is scriptable and automatable through these provisioning framework. And so that's really a powerful thing for us to use when we want to make sure we have reproducible process. I have found almost every organization I work with has some case of we need to be able to templatize our sites. We have a site that we want to make sure we want to boilerplate out, and so that everybody gets the exact same things, or that they always have certain things available on every site. And by using these templates, we can actually automate that stuff. So that's one of the things they're trying to show with the PnP stuff is here's kind of examples of lots of different things you can do. You notice it created 3 sites, and it creates new separate site collections. So this is basically kind of enforcing the Microsoft new religion about we don't use subsites anymore. We're basically creating everything as site collections. So there's a lot more governance around that where we can kind of turn off the ability for people to create subsites. This is really the direction Microsoft's trying to encourage us to go in. I can't say it's going to be a permanent direction. I think it's one of those things that's going to ebb and flow over time. But right now, there's some really good reasons for doing that. I mean, really, we've had a lot of issues when you have a deep site hierarchy and you try to move things around, things get really awkward. When you try to migrate from on-prem up into the cloud, these site hierarchies create problems. There's lots of security challenges because groups and certain assets are shared across all of your subsites. So by nature, if your subsites aren't truly tightly related, we create these issues of creating groups, creating site content types that don't apply equally across all the subsites. And then you also create these navigation holes of I want to navigate down to a subsite, but I might not have access to a parent site, so I have to have kind of security holes so I can navigate through that. So there's lots of reasons why we don't do subsites. But this starter kit basically kind of embraces that. There's a really good blog post I put at the bottom that really, she talks about the really good pros and cons about why we don't use subsites in Office 365. So I just kind of wanted to evangelize that a little bit. So the provisioning templates. Let me show you one of these things real quick. And I don't think we want to dive too deep in here. But I'm going to go bring in code. So here's that deploy.ps1 script. I'm not going to walk through all this because it's kind of boring PowerShell script. But this basically is the thing that basically goes through and does all the deployment stuff. Those XML files are all the PnP provisioning. So if I look at collab.xml, what this is doing is, this one's really simple. It's basically just adding some web custom actions. So it's basically adding these custom actions onto menus. So discuss now, alert notification. It injects the collab footer. There's a redirect. We'll talk about more later. That's actually not live yet. And there's a site classification. So basically, it's basically just registering some custom extensions for these collab sites. So it's nothing too exciting on that side of things. The hub site XML does a lot more. This is kind of one of the main things that really hits our hub site. This thing is actually going out and registering our site scripts, creating fields for us. It's actually injecting pages of content onto that site. It's creating the home page for us with those web parts. It's creating several different other pages, I'll show you in a second. It puts our site design in there, updates our navigation, it creates lists and libraries, and it also registers custom actions and injects some other miscellaneous files, some images and things like that. So all of that's being done through this one XML file that we create. The provisioning framework, by the way, lets you actually take an existing site and you can save it as a template. So you can look at that XML file and kind of play with that. So you get a starting point, figure out like, oh, I don't know how to save that page. So you can kind of save it off and look at it and modify that XML. But it's a really cruelly powerful thing. There's also a terms XML file example in there. Basically, this is injecting things into the tenant term store. So it actually creates the terms that we need on stuff. There's also some stuff in the starter kit that is not quite ready for prime time yet. There's a line of business web part that they've got in there. The idea is, here's a web part that can talk to some line of business application and display data. That's coming soon. That's still under development. There's also a redirect extension, which is actually in the code, but not anywhere in the framework showing. And the idea for that is that's going to be something you can light up on a page if we want to redirect to some other page. It's kind of a different way of doing that. So basically, it's going to inject custom script. Basically, does the 403 redirect or 303 redirect. And then there's also some stuff in there for Azure provisioning, which is, I think, tied to the line of business web part. So basically it creates that whole, I have code running on a back-end Azure web service that I have something on the web part talking to. So those things are in there. They're going to come later on. So if you see reference for those, don't worry about that. I'm also going to ignore those personal web parts. As you saw on the demo, they're a little problematic. They're kind of cool. I mean, basically this harkens back to the SharePoint, I think 2007 days when you had the My Site page that had all of your relevant links to things. So basically what it does is it uses the Microsoft Graph API, which I said is in preview, and it shows things like your calendar, your email, your tasks, your contacts, recently used documents, recently visited sites. It's interesting to look at. It's like all that stuff is accessible and available, and it's interesting to be able to go back and look at that code saying, hey, here's something we might want to use in some places in our applications. It might be nice to create a page that on a team site that says, here's your tasks. So when you visit the page, you see the tasks that are just pertain for you.
This part of Microsoft Graph is not affected by Delve, right? Like if Delve is turned on, is this part of Microsoft Graph still available?
Say again?
Oh, so when you turn off the Delve, often you have to turn on Graph, right?
That's actually two different APIs.
Yeah.
Microsoft Graph is the APIs for accessing all things in Office 365.
Okay.
Office Graph is the Delve API, is the Delve APIs that are the underlying structure that brings all the data together. So this is the Microsoft Graph. And the Microsoft Graph, they basically have a preview version out right now that open things up in Office 365, but it's not fully released for all tenants yet. So that's why we have to be in targeted release to get that stuff. So we're going to talk about the good stuff. These are the goodies that I really like that's in here. There's a tiles web part we're going to look at, which was on the right-hand side, which is basically some new navigation. There's a new compact links web part, which is really nice for doing links. There's a banner we're going to look at. There's stock information and weather. Incidentally, the weather stuff, and we'll talk about that in a second. But weather, it's on the roadmap for Office 365, so eventually everyone's going to get that. And then there's some extensions, and we'll take a look at those. There's a footer extension, and there's one for alerts, too. So we're going to kind of walk through each of these things and show these in more detail. These are the ones that I think are applicable today for production tenants. So if we can create a version of this that we can actually deploy in production, then these are web parts that you can use today on your sites. They solve needs that I have on all my client sites of, I need better ways to do navigation. I need some better ways to show images. I need to show consistent headers and footers on things. So start off on the tiles web part. So this is really kind of a simpler version of Hero. The Hero web part's really cool and everything, but takes up a lot of space, requires a lot of images. But this one's really simple to configure. There's a variety of different layouts we can use for this thing. And we can do some customization on things. One thing about, we're going to see this in the tiles and also in the links web part, is it uses the fabric icons for doing the graphics on things. You don't actually choose a graphic file, you don't choose an image, you just choose one of the fabric icons. The fabric icons are very cool. Let me show real quick. Oh, you're still. That one. This one. I'm going to jump in real quick. This is the problem. Once you touch on that code, it really creates problems. Yeah. I've given up on that. Move on. So I have a bunch of links I'm going to use for demos here, and I just put them on a page. Let me show you the fabric icons. So you'll see this link in a couple of different places. But in the Microsoft, when we design web parts, we design things in Office 365, there's a style that they want us to follow, which is called Fabric. And Fabric has a whole bunch of CSS classes and styles and components and web parts, and there's a lot of stuff that's actually wrapped up in the Fabric APIs. But in this particular case, there's a set of icons we're going to use. And so these icons that are available, if you were actually writing code, this is the code you need to actually put an icon on a page somewhere. That's a simple kind of thing. But there's actually over 1,400 icons in this set of icons. So it's a pretty rich set for us to kind of work off of on stuff. The one thing my one complaint about this, and if I get some time, I'm actually going to see if I can fix this, is the names are a little bit harder to figure out. It's like, I wouldn't think that's caret bottom left solid. The names are really esoteric on stuff, so you kind of have to go through this list quite a bit to figure things out. My favorite two to figure out are, we have one up here which is going to be, where's my cat? I have different resolution here. So here's my cat, right? You can expect. And so down below, you think you're going to find dog, but it's not actually there. Dog is called Fang Body. So I don't know. What I want to do is I want to create a little IntelliSense on this thing to make it a little bit easier to find these things. Because I'm guessing sometimes like what these names are and things. And think that's a rabbit? No, that's fast mode. So I'm not sure where the name came from. But this is kind of the basis we use for a lot of the customization we're going to look at on some of these things. So let's look at some examples of the tiles web part. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to jump over tiles example. So here's some examples of using that tiles web part. I can do a lot of different customizations on things. I control the height. So one of the things about the web part properties, I can specify what the height's going to be on these. Let me put this in edit mode real quick. And look at the web part properties. I'm going to configure these tiles. So this is a real simple way for us to do these tile navigation. There's some issues here. I mean, I can't rearrange these things on order. So that's my one frustration on this that kind of bugs me. I want to have drag and drop and move these things around. But I basically give it a title. I give it a description, which is kind of what shows up on the mouse over, what URL I want to go to. And this is where basically I use those fabric icons. So if I want to say I want this to be the cat icon, I just have to give it the name of that. So that's kind of one thing that's a little bit hard to figure out kind of what those names are. And then I also have target, where basically I can say I want to target this thing to open up in the current tab or open up in a new tab. This is another hot spot that I have a lot of times in Office 365 is you create tab explosions really quick, especially when you touch site contents and start navigating from there. It opens up things in new tabs all the time. So I like having things where I can actually make sure I control, here's when you click this, I know you're going to stay in this tab or you open up a new tab. For example, one of the common ones is when I have something that links outside of my tenant, I want to make sure that opens up in a new tab all the time. So I can do that with this kind of simple configuration. So adding new links in here is very easy to do. Simple to edit this stuff. Like I said, we can control the height of this thing. So let me scroll down so you can see this. So if I go, I want to shrink this down to 100, or make this bigger, like 200. So based on what I do a lot of times, based on what the text I'm putting in there, if I'm putting in long text description, I might want one more space. But I can kind of control that, or you can just take the default space, which is kind of like about 150, I think.
Is that in pixels?
Yes. So the nice thing about this, thing I like about this, is I can do a lot of different configurations. So by default, when I drop this into a zone, it basically does 3 across, and the 4th one wraps around to the next line down. But with that 3 across, I can do some interesting things. So I can do a 6 across by putting 2 sections on my web part page, essentially. So I create 2 side-by-side sections. I can do 9 across. And as you saw on the home page, we actually get this configuration basically in kind of a grid format. So there's a lot of different flexibility we can do with this. By the way, one of the things I really don't like is this orange. So I'm going to change that really quick. So one of the things I always do with my sites is I always have a oh, I hit the wrong thing. Change the look and go to my theme instead of their theme. And get rid of that orange. So all these things are all themable. They pick up whatever theme color you have. So that's kind of nice in terms of that consistency you have across all your sites. So that's kind of the tiles web part. Yeah.
How responsive are the tiles web part?
It's very good. Yeah. So for example, that 3 across stacks vertically. If I go back to that demo page. Tiles. So let's resize this down. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not used to working with these dual monitors. So it resizes.
Okay. So it doesn't actually wrap, it just resizes the box?
Yeah, this one just resizes.
Okay,
Keeps your same basic layout. I think there's another web part I'm thinking about that actually does the wrapping on stuff.
okay.
The nice thing about this, I mean, these things, it's like, this is all open source code. So you can expect that we're going to be playing with this code a lot and make things a lot better.
So what does it do with the, where you've got the 3 sections? We're kind of looking at the 1 section, 3 tiles wrapping.
So this layout or the one on the home page?
There, if you were to shrink the window size on that. with the-
So here's the 9 across. It basically stacks them vertically.
So it does stack.
Yeah, and that's basically doing that because the sections themselves stack as part.
Right.
Thank you. as part of the web part, the basic page, those sections will flow automatically.
So you're saying the sectional size, but the actual.
Web part shrinks
tile
accordingly,
shrink,
but the sections will stack.
sections right.
Yeah.
So if you use it just to play grade across without multiple sections and you have like 4 in there, would it wrap naturally in there or? just
Yeah,
go
within
the
that
same?
section, I'm touching the cable here. Don't do that anymore. Promise.
It's like the promoted links, the pain in there is that it would create a
Yeah.
navigation error.
Right. So the fourth one automatically wraps underneath, and I've never gone beyond 9.
Yeah.
Probably does. Probably keeps going down and down. So this is, like I said, this is. Where are we? That's one of my favorite new things for navigation because it really lets us do some interesting things. The promoted links is one of my pet peeves right now on classic sites when I'm doing migrating because it forces you back into classic mode. You hit a page that has promoted links, it forces you back into classic because it won't render that page in modern at all anymore. It's just, so this is really kind of a best replacement if you have a company that does a lot of things with promoted links. It's like dropping this web part in, really easy to switch them over on stuff. It's also nice that I can actually edit. It's a good and bad. I like being able to edit the properties directly on the web part instead of having to go to the backing list on things. So it's a little bit more direct control on stuff. Sometimes this can work the other way too, if it's nice. So the next web part I want to talk about is the links web part. One of the problems I really have a lot of with links is they have a links web part right now, quick links, but it takes up a ton of physical space on the screen. So if I go back and look at my demo, you're not seeing this, are you? Somewhere that moved. So let's go look at links. So out of the box, we get this thing on the left-hand side, which is called quick links. But basically, it's kind of powerful. It gives us an ability to put a kind of whatever graphic we want in there. We can also put images and stuff in there. We have some information about text. But it takes up a ton of visual space. So using this new links web part, I can basically create a lot of several short little links. I still have my fabric icons next to things, so I have my over 1,400 icons to choose from. And I can also do grouping on things as well. So it's a really more condensed version of navigation that I really like. Editing this is real simple. It's just like the tiles where the navigation, all the links are basically in the web part itself. So I can configure what groupings I want. And then I can also configure the links themselves. Real simple, very similar interface. Once again, there's no way of reordering these things. So basically the order you put them in is important. And the thing I just found when I was setting up this demo is groups are always sorted alphabetically, which is a little bit of a challenge. So like not necessarily the way I want groups. So I will probably do a pull request and make some enhancements on some of that stuff. To actually be able to order these things a little bit better.
You can't add a column to this and be like sort column or something else.
Not the web part is this. But once again, this is just code. I mean, when you look at this code, it's just code that, as a developer, you can actually take down and you can modify and you can make your own versions of these things as well. In PMP, we really encourage people to participate in the program. So if you have something cool that you developed, basically you put a pull request saying, put it back up into the code base. And they'll look at it. They might actually tweak it a little bit with their team to make it a little bit more applicable, fix some bugs, kind of things. But the whole idea is, though, that we can, as a community, build these set of tools for everybody. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes on these things, and I expect we're going to see a lot more around these web parts.
Nice to see the icon, and customize the icon for it too.
Yes, yeah, same thing with the fabric icon. So I can make these. I can't remember what it was. Fang. Anyway, yeah. One of the things I really want is I want to TeleSense there. I want to be able to type ahead and previews something. It's too hard to guess. So that's the links web part. I think links is definitely something that I've been using on some of my tenant sites right now, just because it really solves the problem of I want a really condensed, quick navigation way of doing things. A lot of times I'll do this with just straight HTML markup in page. Basically, you create things, turn them into anchors, and it's really kind of a pain to do, but it's like that's the only thing I had to work with before. So talked about that. So the banner web part. Banners are interesting. I mean, we have these page banners at the top of these pages, and they take up a lot of room, right? And so we need some options for some of that stuff. So these page banners gives us a web part that we can actually configure a lot of different ways. The big thing about this one is we can configure the height of this web part. So it's basically an image web part where we can say, here's the height I want it to be. Don't resize dynamically. Don't make me resize my image to be able to put in here so it takes up the space I want. Let me just specify the size of this thing. So it's a nice little web part for doing that stuff. One of the things I want to point out real quick, I'm not sure how well this is going to demo. Let me go back to my demo. When we look at banners, so the default page banner takes up a lot of vertical space, right? So it's like in this screen resolution, it's taking up almost my whole page just for the header on this page. So, we can do some tricks with some of this stuff. This is kind of, I don't know if you've actually tried doing this before. So on page banners, we can actually go in and, come on, you're interrupting my flow here. So clearly we can hit the X mark and basically take out the banner altogether. One of the other things you can do is once you've saved a page, once you've given it a name, you can actually blank that out. And it will actually say that. The problem is it still leaves the white space up there. So from a design perspective, it's not ideal. But there's a lot of times where I want to have more control over the title on a page. I want to have like a text web part and put some styles and formatting on there I want. And I don't want that page title hanging on the top of my page. But I can actually do it this way. Oh, cool. I've never seen that error before. Who's this from? Weird. Okay.
I've gotten errors like similar to that when I have a picture but document library that are for like TIFFs, and it's doing a tile web part. It will totally just close itself because it can't load the previews with large image files.
Good thing I didn't really care about that. Okay, so other things we can do with this banner web part. So we can take a banner. So this is the banner web part. This is actually broken up into 3 sections. I think we're having a little bit of
Dialogue.
Please hold. Or let's try banner 3. Oh, that's a bad link. Okay, Banner's going to fight me today. But the idea behind the banner web part is it's essentially just an image web part that lets me put an image up there. I can create a link on it. I can control the text that's going to display on there, whether it shows text or not. So it's a way for me to kind of do an alternate page navigation banner. On the SP Starter Kit, we see that on the home page. they're using it at the bottom of the page as a way for doing navigation. Some bandwidth issues. While we're waiting for that, let's check and see how the script, if it worked. It did. No, it didn't. So just a it blew up. Like I said, this is kind of doesn't always work very reliably. The problem is a lot of times, like this particular error I got, I know this is because something is timed out. I've debugged this one under the covers. While I was running, especially running these scripts during the day when Office 365 is getting a lot of use, is sometimes we'll hit timeouts on things, and some of these things don't retry themselves automatically. So it just kind of blows up. The nice thing about this deployment script is that you can actually restart it again. I can run this thing again, and there's an API, there's a key in here saying, don't do the site creation. Skip site creation. So I can just run the exact same thing again, and it should pick up where it left off. Or not, it'll still run itself again, but it will skip the first part since it's already created those sites. So we'll give it a hobby and let it run again. Oh, wait. I touched the cable. Okay, getting back to that. So that talked briefly about the banner web part. Stock, weather, and time. I don't really need to talk about these a whole lot. Go ahead.
Just a quick question on the bandwidth part. You said you control the height. What controls the aspect ratio?
Whatever section you're putting it into.
Okay.
So basically, it'll assume whatever the width of whatever section you're in.
Oh, okay.
So if you put it on full page width, for example, you can do that full width and do a really short thing on top. That's how you get a really nice thin banner on the top of your page. One of my pages is supposed to show that. The stock, weather, and time are basically simple things. I mean, I've created these things dozens of times for clients. They always say, I want a stock ticker on my page. I want a time clock. So these are real simple out of the box kind of things. Hit the properties on those things, specify them. The one thing, that stock web part from XXX, there's a key in my slides. I actually have something in there that talks about the company. There's a free key you can go get from a service they're using to actually get the stock prices. And so basically, when you register when you do the installation, you have to register that key. That's what gets put in the tenant properties, so that web part can actually go out and query stock prices. I'm not going to show these real quick. The web part, like I said, is actually on the roadmap for SharePoint Online. They're going to have that web part eventually. I think they'll probably be announcing it at Ignite. They were demoing it last year at the SharePoint conference, so I don't know why it's not out yet. I'm going to jump over site information. There's a web part called Site Information that actually it's a really narrow use case on this. But the idea is basically it will show you information about the site, like who's the owner of the site, contact information. There's code in there. I wrote this thing for flag needs configuration, but it's not fully implemented yet. The idea was that you could actually have it showing you the thing that this site hasn't been customized yet. And so is an indication that the owner needs to go in and finish doing some setup customization. I think that'll be added later on to a future version of this thing. Alerts are really cool. I love alerts. Alerts uses the SharePoint Framework extension. So this is not a web part, this is actually an extension. Part of the thing that happens when you do that provisioning script is it creates a new content type and registers it back on the hub site. So that's done in the hub site XML file. And it creates this list for alerts. And so I can go into this alert list and add things in, and they will then show up at the top of every SharePoint page across that, wherever that extension is installed. So if I go back to my tenant, go into site contents.
Or site specific?
It is, well, wherever the extension is installed, when you install the extension, by default, it's going into, it's basically the site collection. So since we're in a flat structure now, we don't worry about subsites. We actually install this thing automatically in all three of these subsites as well.
And it's just one, can you do different versions of alerts, like
Yes.
HR alerts versus ops alerts?
Yes, you could, yeah. I'll talk in a second about a little bit more about things that are in the header stuff, but let me show this real quick. So if I go to alerts, this alert list that got provisioned for me.
That's actually pretty cool. I can see that being
Yeah, this is,
really useful.
we've done this in other, we've done similar implementations on other in classic sites we did all the time. So for example, I can have an alert that's going to be called happy hour. Let's edit this thing. I just need to change the start and end times on this.
I missed it.
Um,
No PDX rules. But we missed it. It was 4 days ago.
The one downside of doing things with Office 365 is you're really totally tied to whatever bandwidth you're on. If things are slow, then demos are slow.
Imagine.
Come on. There we go. So I can control, what the message is basically going to be in the alert message, and then I control when I want this thing to start. So start yesterday, and then I can say I want this to be valid until the 17th. And then we also choose the alert type, whether it's informational or urgent, and that basically is kind of the background color. So let's make this one urgent. Save that. And then when I refresh the page, that extension should have run.
So is that
And now there's a
alerts,
banner at the top.
does that alert link to the banner at the top, link to the alerts list in that site collection, or does it point to a central list somewhere? So
This one points to that's actually the site collection level. If I go over to one of the other sites that are part of this tenant or part of this hub site, you notice we don't see that alert over there because it's got its own basically alert list as well over
This
there.
again is just code. So
Yeah, but it's just code. Yeah. So
modify that.
Be great.
yeah, so we can change it to use a central list across
Yeah,
all your
like
sites.
a hub site,
Yeah.
and then it trickles down to all the other sites that are associated with it.
Yeah, there's some interesting code in here about some stuff in the code actually does that. It actually goes out and figures out who's my hub site. Let me go to my hub site and look for information there. So you can get our alerts there. So it's like we could easily extend it to that kind of stuff. One thing about that top navigation. So that top navigation, so that when we talked about extensions that we can do on SharePoint, is basically that top navigation and this footer down here are areas where we can inject code. There's a set of rules though saying only one application is allowed to inject code in there because we don't want to stack all these things up there. It's basically on one owner. So a lot of times we run into these challenges of I have multiple uses that I want to use for that top navigation. And this is where we just need to spend a little more time thinking about it for organization of how we're going to architect that. Maybe we want to use alerts, but we also want to use this for top level navigation for a navigation menu of some kind. This is going to be tenant-wide. So in that case, we just need to combine those two together into one extension for your organization. So it's just something to be aware of when you think about how we're going to use that top navigation or that footer, that you need to think kind of company-wide of we can't have multiple uses going on at the same time. And so if we think alerts are the most important thing, we need to make sure that if we do something else up there, it's going to also incorporate that alert code as well. So the alert stuff is really nice. I especially like the fact that we have start and end times on these alerts. So I can say this alert's going to be something we're going to do maintenance for the weekend. Let people know what's going on. It's a snow day tomorrow. Whatever you want to put out there, we can put dates on those things and reactivate them if necessary. So we did that. Talked about that. So the other one is the footer. So once again, customization, we can inject things into the footer. And so what they've done down here is we've injected a footer on the page. There's some implementation issues that I don't so like about this one, but it's kind of cool to play with. So one thing about the footer is it's a common footer that has all of the list in the hub site that controls all the links for all what's showed up there. So basically, we can easily manage that list to actually control what's going to be in that footer. There's also the ability to customize your own links. If you look on the right-hand side, there's a My Links section. And you can click on an edit link. And users can add their own links to the footer, and it stores those links up in their user profile. One of the things I kind of skipped over is one of the prerequisites when we set this up is we have to register, create a new property in the user profile that it can use for storing this stuff. But that way, every user can have their own set of links that they put onto this page. The footer has some issues, like I said, on implementation that I'm not thrilled with. It's basically kind of you click on it and it bounces up from the bottom, and it slides back down again. The big problem I have with this is it takes up it's an overlay on top of the screen, so it actually hides things that are underneath it. So we can run into some challenges later on. If you have important content at the bottom of your page, it might get hidden. There's also some rendering. When on the home page, it takes a while to render a little bit. But it's pretty easy to work with. It's kind of a nice little implementation on this. And if I click edit, it's just a simple dialogue. So I can go in and add my own links to the stuff. And basically, once again, it just stores that in my user profile. So it's pretty nice to work with. I like this a lot. It's one of the things that I think that is common across organizations, that we need that common footer on things to kind of bring all the sites and across all your site collections together somehow.
How do you edit the, where it says like copyright or?
Funny you should ask.
I mean, there's one central place to manage this footer, right? This is not site by site. This is 10th wide footer.
This is still, it's an extension, so it's basically wherever the extension is installed. So in this implementation-wise, this is site collection by site collection.
Okay, so you'd have to tweak it again if you wanted to be central.
Right, if we want to do this globally wide, then we would do something like, typically what I use is I use the root site collection, the site assets for things that I want to use tenant wide on things, and I would create a version of this web part saying, go to that site collection and that list, and bring this list of links from there. That way, wherever I install the extension, they're all going to use that same common set of links. And you can still have that customization ability. So that company name is actually a property in the extension. So it's not actually hard-coded in there. Actually, it is, but it's like you can overwrite it. So use this PowerShell script, and I'll include this as well. It basically run the script, and basically you can inject it. You can change what that company name is at the bottom of that. So that company name is it's a strange little thing, but this is basically just a JSON blob that basically describes all the properties for that web part or that extension. So it's nice that they gave us an extension. They gave us a property on the extension as the easy way to change that.
Yeah. So Kyle, quick question. You said when originally deploying the starter kit, this has to add an additional property to user profiles.
Right.
So for a tenant that's got 50,000 or 100,000 users, is that going to take a while to churn?
No, you're just putting a new property in the definition for your user profile. It doesn't actually put it in everyone's profile. You're just creating the new property that's available for everybody. And it's only when they actually start using it that it actually starts getting populated their profiles.
Is there any hard limit number of links you can add to that?
I'm sorry?
Is there any hard limit to number of links you can add? Because some folks they'll try to put a number of.
Yeah, I haven't tested it yet to know that there should be. If there's not,
Yeah.
I would probably say 5 would probably be a good number.
I think the property itself is limited to 3,600 characters. So I'm assuming they're storing it as a JSON object in the property, so you may have a fairly limited list of, by the time you get a long URL in there.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'd have to play with that and see. Once again, it's kind of cool when I've been through a couple of different podcasts that talked to the authors of the starter kit, and they basically just grabbed a whole bunch of things like, well, let's put it in the user profile here. Let's grab over here. We'll use a list for the content type for this thing. They really are kind of showing you different ways we can do things. Just one possible implementation. We could also be using, for example, for storing the links, we could be using your Azure AD object and custom objects in your Azure AD. So we could actually be tying it to your Azure profile instead of your user profile on SharePoint. It's just an API, it's just a call. It's the way to kind of place to store these things and get them back again. So it really doesn't matter what the repository is. There's a lot of different flexibility for moving forward on stuff. And the starter kit, from a developer perspective, they're trying to show us kind of a lot of different ways. I think this works well. This scales well for small organizations or even large organizations. But you're right, we need some kind of a limit on how many links you can actually put in there. So with all this in mind, I mean, that's kind of, we've got these web parts and stuff. There's obviously a lot of room for opportunities for customization here. So for your organization, these web parts might make sense to use out of the box. They might fit a need right now. They might be, it's like, we need to actually combine some of these together. We need to customize these things. We need to do things with a footer. We don't want a footer that expands. We want it to be just always at the bottom. You can use this code as a starting place and kind of build it up yourself. It's really easy to work with if you're doing stuff in the framework. This code is very easy to digest. The Git repository that's out there for this stuff, once you basically fork your repository, so you have a copy of that, and then as they make enhancements, you can merge those into your repository as well, because I expect we're going to see bug fixes on some of these things over time. So these things are going to change, they're going to get better. So if you're doing local development on stuff, you can still bring those changes into your code base. The simplified installation, like I've mentioned before, is if you want to do this without having to require targeted release, what we need to do is kind of create a special version of this package for this. And I've actually done this on my system. It's not that hard to do. It's basically deleting things. You basically bring down the whole repository and you delete all these web parts that require Microsoft Graph. And so you delete the actual web part things, and you have to update 2 config files, the JSON, the update package solution, and also the config JSON, which is just references. Just delete all the references for those web parts, and then when you build that package can then be installed on any tenant on SharePoint. Now that package will install all these web parts, which is great. But the problem is several of these web parts and extensions require special lists. For example, the footer requires that list, the alerts requires that list. So you have to provision those content types and those lists as well. And that's where the deploy PS1 basically does all that work for you. So we kind of have to do a little bit of work with customizing that, the hub site XML file, and kind of ripping and tearing out of that a little bit just to make sure we do just provision the things we care about for support those minimal web parts. I'm going to show a couple more things real quick. So PMP has a bunch of other things as well that are really cool that I really like. One is this thing with this common menu. So we have this header at the top, right? But a lot of times in our organizations, we still have a lot of classic stuff out there. So if I go and look at this, so if I go to a modern site, this is a web part. Basically, it's an extension that creates a global navigation. So at the top here, I have this navigation. This exact same code can be injected into a classics page as well. And if I click on the link, I click really hard on the link. If I enter the URL, this is basically just using a simple injecting JavaScript code onto a page, and it injects the same navigation structure onto classic pages as well. So this will give us a consistent navigation whether you're on a classic or whether you're on a modern. Hello. Really, it's there. But it's just an example of, once again, it's in the PMP repository. It's kind of an example of here's something we can do out of the box. That actually provides not only a custom header at the top, but also a footer at the bottom of the page. Kind of another implementation of that. So here we are on a classic site, and we have the same navigation on the top structure. I was playing with putting these web parts. In theory, any SharePoint framework web part, just like is also applicable for Classic too. You can actually install them on Classic. These don't work for some reason. I was trying to configure this. The weather configure is fine, but the properties don't stick. So I need to debug that one.
Will that menu also appear on like documents or on the document page?
I don't know. Let's find out. No.
What if you switch to classic?
Let's see.
Well, I mean,
There we go. Yeah. So if we're on classic mode, the hard part, if I installed the extension on this classic site, the modern extension version of it too, it would probably work for both, going back and forth. That's one of the really challenges things when we're dealing with the classic and modern, is on classic sites you still bounce back and forth between modern and classic, and it's really hard to teach people what the difference is and how to be consistent. So I try to move into modern as much as possible.
And recently I noticed one more thing is when I created multiple views on the modern side, in the document library, and putting that out on the landing page or somewhere, and the view is not sticking back, and it keep on putting all the documents in that view. not sticking to one view because I have a way to configure it, but still it's not.
Yeah. That document library web part is still in preview right now, and there's several known issues. This is one of the things I expect we're going to see out of Ignite. They've talked a lot about the fact that we're going to get a new set of web parts that are really, it's kind of the native document library experience that we can embed as a web part. They're doing this mainly for Teams. So on the Teams channels and stuff, you can actually have a page that's showing you a true document library. It's a true view when you have all the configuration things that we want out of that, and it's a modern view on that as well. And so I think that's where all the work's going right now. I have a lot of problems with that web part as well. The adding new documents works intermittently. It's like I do a demo sometimes and it works, and the next day it doesn't, so I can't figure out why. So some other examples. Running out of time, so I'm not going to go into these a lot. There's also a search refiner one. I mean, one of the challenges we had in modern search, we don't have a search web part anymore. We've had to revert back to classic when we want to do a search page or a customized search page that is like the search refiners. This is a really cool web part that you can actually, you install, you drop on a page, and basically you can configure it just like the old classic search web part. So it lets us kind of do things like I want to show just these certain types of documents, along with refiners on things as well. So it's a really nice flexible thing. And then the other one I really like a lot is there's a column formatting library out there. Basically, this has a list of all examples of different column formatters. Column formatters are basically just kind of an XML configuration you can do on a modern list or library that lets you customize how that field is being rendered. So for example, I want to show if something's past due, I want to show it in red, or I want to show it as a bar graph instead, or I want to inject an image instead of the text there. We can do all the things with column formatters. So it's pretty powerful. This web part is really cool because it actually lets you just drop a web part on a page and you design your column formatting interactively. And then it spits out the XML, the JSON that you can then paste into a page. So it's one I really like a lot. There's another one coming next week that Sean Spires is doing, which is basically the same structure for doing site designs and site scripts. Basically, you define things interactively in a web part, and it spits out the code you need to do stuff. Yeah.
Quick question. After implementing the starter kit, the one feature I read about was some discussion feature on document libraries, and I could not find.
Yeah, that's actually buried away. Let me see if I can find it real quick. So if I go back to my demo, let me go to. It's actually on the team sites. Put document in here. Come on, it's there. Should be here. I'll have to go take a look at that. It's registered as just an extension, a command, custom command that is supposed to be on a documents.
And I've looked and looked and I cannot find it.
Yeah, I'll have to go. I'll have to debug that one down. Something didn't.
Classic, is it only visible in modern?
Oh, that could be. Let me go. Let's go modern. That's a really good point. There it is. Yeah. So it's basically just custom extension that lets you kind of schedule discussions on stuff. It's kind of weird use case, but once again, it's just a demo of kind of functionality on stuff. So key takeaways for you guys. Cool web parts that you can use today. Banners, titles, alerts are great. The provisioning framework is awesome, and you guys should look at that if you have a need for doing templatized, reproducible site creation. And customization is back. So think about how we want to use these things for headers and footers. We want to do custom columns. We can do custom web parts. We can do command extensions. We can do a lot with these small building blocks they've given us so far. These are really fundamental pieces that we can actually customize our SharePoint environments now. Whole set of bunch of resources. Here's links to, there's demo examples of web parts, extensions out there, the PEP-PNP PowerShell, the starter kit itself, how to do column formatting, the provisioning schema, JavaScript core and CSOM core. There's great extensions on how we can have helper libraries that make it a little bit easier to do development with SharePoint Framework. And then at the very bottom, I put in the starter kit for standard tenant. Bo put out to get an example of, talked about how you create a version of these web parts that run just on a standard thing. He's actually done that for us. He put it out in GitHub. He's not maintaining that, so it's a static snapshot of today, but it works. But it's like if you want to take it, drop with it, play with it, you can. You can always contact me if you need help in terms of getting development stuff, helping your team get started on this stuff, helping how you customize it for your organization. That's the kind of stuff I'd love to do. And that's it. Thank you, guys. There's a link in here for feedback if you want to give me feedback on stuff, on the presentation and the content, and give me some ideas for kind of future things you want. But that's it. 5 minutes to spare.